Okay. 3, 2, 1. This podcast shit.
You're like, damn it!
This podcast contains. Now stop interrupting me, damn it! This podcast contains explicit language. Jesus.
This episode of Dorking Out is brought to you by Offline Games. Like video games, but think they're too loud, expensive, and you're tired of spending so much time in front of a screen? Try Offline Games. They're video games that you can play on your kitchen table. Each game comes with a handy board and either cards or dice, or sometimes both. And when you're finished playing, Offline Games can be easily stored in our patented offline game receptacle. Order your offline game today using the code WINNER and save 20%.
Houston, flight is go.
Mila, let's go. SPM. Safety contact.
From Assignment X, thesoniashow.com, and Amalgamated Storytelling, this is the Dorking Out Show, the podcast for people who love stories from movies, TV, books, podcasts, and everywhere else.
Welcome to episode 96 of Dorking Out, our weekly status check of Star Trek Discovery. This is the War Without, War Within edition. Returning today to talk about it is Alexandra August. Why does Jeff always get to go first? A huge Star Trek fan, writer for Geek Magazine, as well as host of my favorite Game of Thrones podcast, Got Thrones, and the new DiscoTrek. Jeff Bond is also returning today. He is my favorite living critic, author of many Star Trek and entertainment books, including Seth McFarland's The Orville, as well as the host of the brand spanking new Bonds of Geekdom. Jeff, do we have a launch date for Bonds of Geekdom?
We do not. I'm still editing episodes, but I think it's sort of. I'm thinking it kind of has to go live before Valentine's Day.
All right.
A Valentine's Day episode, and there's I think at least 2 Oscars episodes, so it kind of needs to go live before the Oscars too. So we'll see.
Cool. All right. So everybody listening, rush on over to Jeff's podcast when it comes live. I'm sure we will give you more information as it develops. So in this episode of Discovery, the crew find themselves back in the Prime Universe. The Klingon War isn't going as well as they had hoped, but it doesn't look like it is going as bad as it looked in last week's cliffhanger. Last week's cliffhanger, it looked like it was over. It's done. The Federation's crushed. Here, it looks like the Klingons only took 20% of their Federation space, I guess. Anyway, the story progresses a bit. This feels like the kind of episode that we would never have to sit through in a less connected, less serialized, more episodic show. For me, this felt like the drawbacks of having a lot of serialization came home to roost. I was semi-bored in this episode, but I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I was, this is definitely sort of like the calm before the storm. Like, let's plan out the mission and talk about the mission, and then you realize like 15 minutes into the episode, I'm like, ugh, the mission's not going to happen this week. But there were a lot of really wonderful moments, especially between actors. The Laurel and the Cornwall stuff I thought was brilliant. I liked Laurel a lot, just period. And I thought the scene between Ash, whatever, the scene between Tilly and all that stuff with Ash Tyler was, I thought, really, really quite well done. The scene where obviously Tilly goes and sits with him in the cafeteria, and so does Kayla Detmer. And then the scenes, his scene with Burnham was so lovely. Those two are so good together. Even at the same time where he was, at the same time in my head, like, he's like, why can't, it's like, you just want out of this because it's rough. And I'm like, well, sir, you are a Klingon. And kind of super untrustworthy because your brain's been super messed with. Like,
yeah, didn't he say because it's complicated?
Yeah, like basically, or like, yeah. Essentially, he accused her of like bailing as soon as their relationship hit like a speed bump, and it was just like, dude, this is
Yes,
like you're kind of minimizing what's happening here.
That was exactly my thing. It's like, yes, it's complicated. They took
You're an alien.
Yes, they took the murderous brain of a warlike species, put it into your head. You might not even be the guy that I thought. You might not even be human anymore for all I know. Yeah, you know what? I'm going to step back. I might not return your texts as fast as I used to. You know, that I was kind of shocked at how underwhelmed I was by that exchange. And maybe it was that line, because it felt like they were trying to push it to this dramatic face-off that it didn't quite land because of exchanges like that. But I don't know. Maybe I'm being too harsh.
I was kind of surprised. It feels like an example of the Trek reset button, that we're just going to wipe away the fact that this is basically, like what Tilly said, like this is a completely new person thing. He's unpredictable. They drum him out of Starfleet, but he's still allowed to like run around the crew and go to the mess hall and mix with people. Like I would think, I know it's Star Trek and it's not Battlestar Galactica, but you would think they would keep him isolated just in case somebody else went off, like somebody else on the crew threatened him, because they couldn't clearly see the difference between Ash Tyler and Vogue and this crazy thing that had happened.
Well, he actually makes that argument himself. So I mean, it's interesting. I've heard a number of people say they thought this one was boring. And I actually have a guy sort of on the inside who was telling me like last week that this one was very, very talky, and it obviously was very talky. But I actually like this much better than the last few episodes. And I guess I feel like if they could have sprinkled a lot of this kind of character interaction maybe throughout the previous episodes, instead of having one big kind of character interaction dump here. But at the same time, I felt a little bit more like I was watching a Star Trek show, and I felt a little bit more like I was watching something that knew what it was trying to do. I was much more impressed by Michelle Yeoh in this episode, even though it's a big problem, and this just goes back to the inconsistency in the writing, that her character is, very inconsistent. She's, kind of heroic and reasonable, and for all practical purposes is barely a Mirror Universe character in the previous episode. And then in this episode, so I was really thinking, this is going to be, how interesting is it going to be to have her on the Discovery, if she's just going to be like a reasonable, not very far from the original Giorgio character. So I liked the fact that they immediately dealt with her being a Mirror, Universe person who was not, really operating by the same rules as the Starfleet officers. And, I felt like she seemed like a much more kind of confident, powerful, potentially dangerous character. So it's just weird, like how, I don't know whether it's a difference in directors. I thought this episode was much better directed and edited than the last couple. And it seemed like someone maybe was guiding Michelle, just kind of reminding Michelle Yeoh to stay in character. But I liked almost all the scenes. I do agree about the Tyler scene, and that was kind of ultimately kind of a little bit laughable in terms of presenting this along the lines of a relationship scene. But I liked, the whole episode. I felt like they were actually dealing with everything that had happened. It was almost like they had a checklist to go down to, okay, we've got to deal with this, we've got to deal with this, we've got to deal with, the fact that Burnham lied to Saru, we have to deal with the relationship and what, the fact that Tyler killed the doctor, And
right.
So, so there was a little bit of a checklist, but I felt the writing was overall very strong, much sharper than it had been in the previous episodes. So, my frustration with the show, I think, all goes back time and time again to the inconsistency of the writing. We'll get one script where it seems like, the writers are totally on top of what's going on. They know exactly what they're trying to say. And then we'll get, and then weirdly, we'll get episodes like in the Mirror Universe where you'd think, the stakes are now so high and they've got to pay things off, and this all has to be electrifying, and instead it winds up being kind of boring and you're not sure exactly what they're trying to do. And the other thing I liked about this episode that's different from a lot of the previous ones is they had a fully realized visual effects sequence. I think that this show has fewer spaceship shots than the original Star Trek, which could barely, muster the effects shots together. Basically, they had to, repeat a library of shots every week, which this show can't do because they're sort of in different situations every week. And I get that, but you still have to deliver a Star Trek visual experience. And it's very weird that this show is so cutting edge in a lot of ways, but it's so stingy in terms of just showing us the outside of the ship. So I like that whole sequence. I thought, I don't know that the spore thing makes any sense, or that it ever has made any sense, but there's at least a little bit of consistency in okay, we're going to have to, in order to have these things do what they're doing, there has to be a huge mass of them interacting. So we have to terraform this planet. I thought that was at least an interesting, kind of original idea for Star Trek. So overall, I was far more entertained by this than I was by the last few Mirror Universe episodes.
Interesting. Wow, it's funny you should say that because, I watched this 15 hours ago, and as soon as you said, yes, this had this big effects sequence, my mind, I have to admit, immediately went to, oh my God, what was the effects sequence? What happened? And then when you mentioned the spores, it's like, oh, right, yeah. That really didn't stick with me all that much. Let me ask you this. Is it me, or did they in the last couple weeks, they couched it as, if the Mirror Universe people keep doing what they're doing, all the spores everywhere are going to be dead, and it's going to take all of life with it. And then this week, I might be missing something. It's basically, we need a lot of spores right now. Well, you know what? Let's just go to this one planet and make them. Boom, bing, bang, boom. And they make them in a day, 2 days.
There were a lot of really easy solutions this week.
Right.
There were a lot of we have this big problem, and then immediately someone walks up, well, here are my solutions to fix it. So that was kind of we didn't see sort of the eureka moments from a lot of people this week. It was...
Well, it's been ongoing. The whole spore idea has always basically been just another, technobabble idea, except it's, the Next Generation and other technobabble probably was grounded a little bit more in real science, but to me wound up just getting to be incredibly boring because it was always the same kind of thing. We're going to reverse the polarity on the tachyons, and so at least this is it's something a little bit different. But there's certainly a lot of discussion and laying the groundwork for the idea that all this information is going to have to be buried and destroyed, so we never use it again. So I'm assuming maybe that the location of this planet was picked so it's never going to be found, or they're going to ultimately destroy it, or maybe whatever they're going to do is going to wipe out the spores. Who knows? I don't expect them to really be consistent and solve all the logical problems because they haven't been showed that capacity very strongly over the season, but it does seem like it at least seems like they do have this up on a whiteboard somewhere and are trying to figure it out. I just felt like there was a little bit more thought put into strategy and what was going on here.
I thought it was.
I've been seeing.
I still think that they're going to reset the timeline and we're not going to get this Klingon war because it never happened. Like the Klingons we've never had this big a confrontation where the Klingons managed to occupy 20% of Federation space and the Empire is so disunified and they've got, these Klingon houses making runs at Starfleet or Federation assets basically in a giant like space dick measuring contest. It's like, I feel like the only way to cover that up is to do a big time reset. And so I'm still kind of trying to figure out how they're going to get around that if that's not what they want to do.
Did they?
All the talk about, how this has to be kept secret, I think points to that.
No,
I just don't, but I don't see how you can like keep the war secret is my thing. I don't think it's a matter of keeping secrets. I think they're going to have to.
But
I think they have to pull some timey-wimey stuff.
Yeah, but didn't they make reference to a lot of conflict with the Klingons in the original series? I always took it as some sort of they've had serious scrapes in the past that
not like this though.
Okay.
But if I can say, I don't know that 20% really. Although the idea that they're getting close to occupying Earth certainly seems like a very
well, yeah, it's been going on for a year. There's nothing like this has appeared in, and like I feel like a really like sad parody of a history teacher being like, we've never heard anything about this. It's not in any of the books. Like this seems like the show has been pretty good about being stewards of canon, despite how people whine at me every time I say that. They've made it pretty clear that anything that feels really out of place, like Michael Burnham's very existence, like the Discovery's existence, like the fact that there's this big, almost year-long, it's a 14-month-long conflict between the Klingons and the Federation. The Klingons almost get to Earth, and we've never heard about it, and it's 10 years before the original series. It's just
okay.
It's too big. It's too big a showdown. And then supposedly there was a war between the Klingons and the Federation, but it only lasted like a month, and then there was just a Cold War, which is what we saw referenced in TOS. Has been my understanding of the original canon.
Okay, yeah, you might be right. I admit I remember Trek history in very big broad strokes, but not down to that minute level, which is why apparently I am not a Star Trek fan at all, according to.
I thought there was a big Klingon war too when I first started watching this, and then the more that I looked it up, I was like, oh, this is a very different conflict than what we're used to. But,
but I'm not sure where do they actually state that this only lasted a month?
I will look up again and see if I can't find where that was referenced, but I specifically found that it's a war referenced in the original series, and it supposedly only lasted a month.
Right. So
but I don't remember anything in the original series where they actually get it down to saying specifically it's a month. But it's possible there's mention in one of the other series, but I don't recall that specifically. I mean, you might very well be right. It just doesn't. That doesn't jump out to me as being a big Star Trek fact. I should be remembering, but I've forgotten a lot of Star Trek over the years. So.
Well, there is a lot of Star Trek to forget. The episode.
Oh no, there's the Klingon War of 2256 to 2257. The Federation Klingon War, which I guess is longer than a month.
Oh, look at that. I guess we got the war. I guess so.
Wait. All right. Sorry. Never mind.
No, that's okay. Let me move on a little bit and push into what seems to me to be a rather harebrained plan, which is for the Federation to pretend that a murderous tyrant from a mirror universe is actually one of their most respected captains, and give her the Discovery to go on this secret mission. That seemed like a very cool, dramatic moment that
it's
that seems if you
stand up to scrutiny.
Exactly. Yeah, you think about the motivations and the thought process of any of the people in that chain of command, and suddenly that cool dramatic TV moment seems to me to completely fall apart. What did you guys think?
Yeah,
I think oh, go ahead.
I don't know. It's not like they told everyone who saw Georgiou on the Discovery to keep it a secret. So I find it pretty hard to believe that the rumors have not gotten around that this is not Captain Georgiou. And a bunch of people, well, I guess not everyone saw that I guess plenty of people on Discovery didn't see that she was the Emperor, but I just find it hard to believe that wouldn't have gotten around. And so the idea of Cornwell being like, it's totally Captain Georgiou and we found her. Isn't this lucky? Like, what a coincidence. Like, I just find it really hard to believe that nobody would be like, we did just come from an alternate universe filled with copies. And this woman looks a little fishy. I don't know.
That's true. I didn't even think about that whole chain of events. Of course, yes, every person on the ship will know it's not her.
I mean, I agree that it was, and it fits in with kind of what the show has been trying to do, of giving us a lot of shocking moments and reversals. To me, I thought of it in terms of Burnham's kind of opening moments where she's I think that I've thought the whole last few episodes that it's strange what they're doing with Burnham, because she's gone from kind of like fighting her way to show her competence and strengths as a Starfleet officer to really be kind of being unraveled by her relationship with Tyler, and then unraveled by seeing Georgiou in the mirror universe, to the point where I'm not sure we should really have any reason to trust what her decisions, as being good ones. And she at least they had the, decency to kind of have her address that and have her questioning herself very openly at the beginning of the episode. And I kind of appreciated that. But now we have, Cornwell basically making a decision that's every bit as daffy as what Burnham did. So it starts making you wonder just, how great are these Starfleet officers? It feels like
Cornwell seems to be
the only one that's kind of making the right decisions.
Right.
Yeah, it feels like Cornwell is really like at the end of a rapidly fraying rope. She looked stressed this week, and I liked how human it was. I like how human everyone is on this show, in terms of showing their emotions when they're on duty, which I feel like is not necessarily something we've gotten a ton of, whether or not it's appropriate. But she just really looked like she just, like I said, like at the end of a rapidly fraying rope. And like in her scenes with L'Rell, she's like, listen, just stop the war. You're a Klingon. You should be able to do this. Tell them that they're killing children and they're being really unfair. And L'Rell's like, yeah, I know.
That's kind of our thing.
We're Klingons. I know it sucks. Trust me. I know it sucks. But
I think also her, what another thing that fell flat was her like, Lorca seemed like such a great officer to me. After she's had that whole, crazy, awkward, night, romantic evening with him, where she finds out he keeps a gun in his bed and has weird scars on his back, and then winds up sending her off, on a mission where she's going to get, kidnapped by the Klingons. Cornwell, I do like the character, and I agree that I like the fact that they're kind of showing her unraveling. But again, this is like supposed to be one of the highest officers in Starfleet. I guess that goes back, though. That's a kind of a classic tradition in post, even original series Star Trek, where you show like an admiral or a commodore, who's never as together as the actual star of the show. Always, the captains are always the ones who actually know what they're doing. So it does kind of fit in, but these decisions, I can't imagine, anybody in the original show or even Next Generation, like going this far and like, hey, let's put this, crazy dictator, in command. But I guess it does show, the desperation that they're in, and that is all addressed, and it clearly, one of the themes of the episode is how are we going to deal with actually being pushed up against the wall this much by the Klingons, and how far are we willing to go? And I like that if you look at the trailer for next week's episode, I like that Burnham is the one who's voicing the moral objections to this and talking about, staying true to our principles. So at least that, they are keeping that, their kind of eyes on the prize in terms of addressing that. And, because with all this crazy stuff happening, I think you often wonder with the show whether, like, did they forget the Federation's supposed to be, like, idealistic?
Yeah.
I thought that was one of my favorite parts of last week was Saru's speech, just because it felt like we don't take. It's like, we don't take no in scenarios. We're just that kind of like, it was like a Starfleet Federation pep rally. I wished I'd had a pennant or something that I could.
Well, obviously the show is ultimately going to lead to, that being sort of the whole point. But I guess, we are one episode away from the end of this season now. And I think ideally you would have wanted to see a little bit more of a through line with Burnham, seeing her, we saw her humbled and, kind of trying to work her way back up as a Starfleet officer. And we do see her then kind of thrown these curveballs that are kind of undermine her and cause her to unravel a bit. But the thing is that we've gotten her like kind of thoroughly unraveled right up to the very bare end of the series. So it's going to. She has one episode now to kind of right the ship, externally and internally. And I feel like I wish there was a little bit more of a, easier to follow journey. But maybe ultimately it's going to all fall into place. Like I said, the fact that that's a key moment for the end. The final episode, I think, is reassuring. This is where we have to go, I think, with this character in order for us to stick with her and trust her, in upcoming seasons of this show. They can't leave her as the person who, screwed up, let this Klingon agent fool her for months. Right. And then, fall under the spell of an evil dictator in the mirror universe. She's kind of got a lot to make up for in one episode at this point.
Yeah, I think it hit me when she was giving her speech last night about something about it being punishing, these last few months being punishing and difficult, and how hard everything was. And I think she was referencing how everybody had suffered and what they had all been through for the last year. And my reaction was, God, yeah, that's right. This is punishing. This is really dour. And I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, if it's not all happy up Data and his cat Star Trek, then it's too dour and dank for me. I kind of like a little bit of darkness. I like having a variation in tones. But it seems like this show has had that one consistent tone through the season, which is everything is awful. It's going in the wrong direction. We're all being scarred by what we're living through, which all makes sense. But I don't know. Something about watching it in last night's episode hit me that like all the hopes that I'd have for the show, all the let's wait and sees, some of them are starting to not kind of develop in the way that I would hope, or not come to fruition. And I am a little worried about the tone and the style of the show going forward being this punishing, I guess, to take Burnham's words. What do you stepping back overall, how are you feeling about the show in general now?
Well, like I said, this to me seemed to step up from the previous episodes. The previous episodes, given that they were the biggest revelations, that we were faced with over the course of the series, I was watching both of those feeling like I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to be feeling here. I'm not sure what kind of impact this is really supposed to have on me as a viewer.
Right.
This episode, I felt like they addressed what was going on a little bit more and tried to actually deal with it. And I just wish that a little bit more of that kind of writing had been sprinkled throughout the previous episodes and to give us a little bit more guidance and reflection on how this was impacting everybody and what the real stakes were. I guess if this next episode is terrific, it's still going to be a way better first season than Next Generation had. I'd say maybe even better than Enterprise or Voyager did.
For sure.
But it's rocky, and but it's funny if you look back at the Next Generation. I think they had a writer's strike or something happen at the very end of the first season.
Oh yeah, they did.
They had just started to get a few. They never really had, I think, any what I would call terrific episodes in the first season, but they had a few that were a little bit more interesting and seemed to show that the show getting a little bit more sophisticated. And then the final couple of episodes are just outright lousy.
Yeah.
And it's a really disappointing nothing end to the season. So that, it's not like that can't happen. And particularly when you're trying to reinvent the wheel, which is what Next Generation was doing. And then what Discovery is trying to do, the stakes are very high. It's very easy to screw up. So
yes. Well,
I'm still optimistic. I think the next episode looks promising. I think this episode started to take things a little bit back in a direction that I find satisfying, but there are still kind of jaw-dropping, things like the whole putting Giorgio in command, where you're like, really? But you got to admit it's interesting. I mean,
that's true.
It is like a shocking twist.
Right.
I also really enjoyed. Just a side note. I really enjoyed Sarek and Giorgio kind of like being the proud parents of their dueling Michael Burnhams and comparing the two. It was really adorable. They were total tiger moms.
That's true. That's true.
And I like Sarek saying, don't be afraid to love someone, that you might think that's out of character, but Sarek is someone who stepped completely outside of his race, to basically fall in love with a human woman, which is a kind of a huge statement on its own. So it does make sense for his character to really say something like that.
Yeah, I felt like they had some really lovely moments towards the end. It seems like she's completely forgotten the fact that I guess the Mirror Universe kind of trumped the fact that he screwed her out of getting into the Science Academy. But it seemed like they had resolved all of that completely, which I kind of didn't mind, because they had Burnham and Sarek had this really lovely goodbye before he leaves to go back to Vulcan to talk about probably using biological weapons or something. And
and there's quite a lot of, if you look at the whole season, they do delve into that relationship. Between her memories and the stuff going on with them in person, they deal with it quite a lot.
Right. So I would be remiss near the close of the show to not go to Alex Truxtadamus of the show to ask her, so what's going to happen next week and also throughout season 2?
Oh no, so much pressure. I'm wrong. I don't know. I still maintain. I realized I looked up that episode Errand of Mercy, and they talk about like that's where the only like known war between the Klingons and the Federation happened was in that episode, and then the Organians step in and stop it. So I still maintain that this particular conflict will not have happened by the end of the series, but obviously I can and have been wrong. So
I think that they were going to put Giorgio in command.
I don't know what you're talking about. You've been correct 100%.
I did not predict they would put Giorgio in command because I think that's a terrible decision.
Who could predict that? Yeah.
Yeah. I also predicted that Stannis Baratheon would survive season 5 of Game of Thrones, and I was wrong. And I was really annoyed by that too. Mostly because when Brienne kills him, it's a really crappy shot, and they don't actually show him dying. And I was like, well, obviously he's still alive. This is a twist ending. Why would you do that?
Yeah.
That's really important.
Right.
And I was wrong.
Right. All right.
Oh, well.
Do you guys have anything else that you would like to say before we pack up shop and wait for episode 15, the season finale of season 1 of Star Trek Discovery?
Just set phasers to destroy fortune cookie.
Excuse me.
That's a special setting.
No, you know what?
Rarely used, but it's effective.
That's right. That was another thing where I thought if I was just some random officer in that room, I would maybe try to take the phaser away from her at that point. If you're just blasting stuff off the shelves, you know what? Maybe why don't I hold on to that for a while? So
yeah.
I told you she's at the end of her rope. It's great.
You're right. You're 100% right.
A lot of people like that. Even IO9 love that, and they are often very harsh about the show.
All right, guys. Look forward to gathering again in 1 week to talk about A, episode 15, and B, just kind of our thoughts on the show as it ends. So,
bye-bye.
Bye, folks. See you next week.
Bye-bye.